The Stabber line of cruisers has long been one of my favourite lines of cruisers in both EVE Online and EVE Echoes. I love how these ships look, and they're an awful lot of fun to fly. I do miss the Vagabond from EVE Online, so I was kind of excited to get all the way up to tech level 10 and try the Stabber 2. The original Stabbers were basically my workhorse when I was first leveling up to tech level 10, back when we were all doing that climb. And the Stabber fleet issue specifically has a very firm place in my heart as one of the ships that I had most fun PvPing in, and a lot of that is thanks to folks like Vetermune and their absolute adherence to this vessel. Now, Silent Rose obviously is skilled into hurricanes heavily, so it was very easy for me at tech level 10 just to add in the cruiser skills, and suddenly I could fly the Stabber 2 with a modicum of success. And this has been an interesting ship for me to fly. I've taken it out in a lot of different PvE scenarios and tried to figure out how to get this thing to work in any way that seems better than a Cynabal, or literally better than any other option really on the table. And I struggled. I couldn't find anything. It was a difficult ship for me to work with. So I sat down with Vetermune, Axel, and a few others, and had some chats about how the Stabber 2 could best be utilised. And that's what I'm going to be presenting in this video, because it does have some definite advantages over the Cynabal, both in terms of cost and some of its other stats that I'll get into later. So hopefully this video will give you some inspiration on where and when you can fly the Stabber 2, and if this is a ship that you're flying, and I haven't spoken to you about it already, I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. While you're down there as well, hit like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and if you do want to go the extra mile to help support content like this, you can head across to both my Patreon at patreon.com/CaptainBenzie, or my Redbubble merchandise store, both of which are linked in the description down below. All that said and done then, let's jump right in to talking about the Stabber 2. The Stabber line of cruisers is the Minmatar Republic's attack cruiser. You first gain access to these all the way down at tech level 5 with both the Stabber and the Stabber Trainer. The Trainer is obviously one of the ones you can choose in that training box as well as you're going through the advanced tutorials. And they're really interesting ships. As I said, I really like the visuals of the ship, that sort of long, sleek look to it. It's very typical Minmatar, and they tend to have some really cool stats for things like medium cannon range and activation time. They're all about the cannons firing that little bit faster. They're also very fast ships as well, and once we get up to the Stabber fleet issue, we start getting bonuses for things like the flight velocity as well there. And anyone who's anyone pretty much knows that the fleet issue is probably one of the most popular PvP ships in EVE Echoes, popularised by the likes of Vetermune, who has turned this rather unassuming cruiser into an absolute beast. At tech level 8, there's also the Stabber Sniper. This was a bit of a weird one for me. I found that, okay, it kind of is more of a side grade over the fleet issue than a direct upgrade, which I kind of like. They have different uses. There are times when you'd use a fleet issue, times when you'd use the Stabber Sniper. But I was really hoping that once we hit tech level 10, the Stabber 2 was going to be something really quite special. And in some ways it is, but in other ways it's kind of disappointing, but we'll get to that. Now, obviously, being a medium cannon cruiser, there are going to be a lot of parallels drawn with this, a lot of comparisons made to the Angel Cartel Cynabal, and a lot of people have asked me when I'm talking about the Stabber 2, why would you ever fly a Stabber 2 instead of a Cynabal? And that's kind of the question I'm hoping to answer in this video. But first of all, let's just talk about the looks, because I'm not kidding, I love the look of this ship. I just love the profile, I love the engine stacks at the back there, even the little dorsal fin on the bottom. It's a really cool looking ship, and some of the skins do some really cool, quite interesting things with it. Like, my personal favourite, though, still has to be the Comet Core. I love how this works and how it looks on the ship. It's what you can see that I've got equipped onto mine there in the opening. Obviously, I've changed the colours back to the Sebiesta, but you still get that sort of blue glow and the comet trails to it. Even the bull skin, readily available there in the Scholar Point store, is a pretty cool skin. Adds a nice lot of detail to it. Very cheap to get and nice and easy. I do recommend it. I love the look of this ship just in general. There's some really cool stuff going on here. But anyway, enough about how it looks. Let's talk about its statistics. So, starting at the top, we have a fitting profile, 1 medium drone tube, 5 high slots, 3 mids, 5 lows, and 3 of each rig type. 5 highs, of course, are going to be filled with medium cannons. 3 mids, yeah, there's a lot of versatility you can get to on the Stabber 2 in this one. Lows mainly are going to be shield tank, but you can armor tank the Stabber surprisingly well if the situation does call for such a thing. You've got a pretty decent power grid as well. 972 megawatts is fairly sizable. In fact, if we were to jump out into the Angel Cartel and compare that to the Cynabal, for example, you'll see that it is actually larger than the Cynabal. 949 there, 972 on the Stabber 2. And that's not the only place where the Stabber 2 does actually beat out the Cynabal. But anyway, let's jump back into the Stabber 2 and keep talking. The cargo hold is slightly larger, 1,260 cubic meters. 1,260, yeah, that's the correct way of saying that in a roundabout way. 1,260 cubic meters. No idea where my brain was going there. Pretty solid defenses. Shield, armor, and structure are fairly equal. Yes, okay, I know there's about 1,100 difference between structure and shield, but the armor isn't actually as far behind as you might think compared to, say, the Caracal 2, for example, which has big shields and pathetic armor. Now, people will say, well, why would you ever go into armor tanking then? You kind of can, because it's got better overall resists, and especially if you're wanting to resist electromagnetic damage, if you're like farming in a Mars space or shooting up against the Mars targets, then the Stabber 2 can actually be really viable for that. Also, the additional power grid means that you don't have to worry too much about those being quite power grid hungry, and it helps with your capacitor. It's genuinely viable. The two fits I'm going to talk about are both shield tanked, but armor tanking, yeah, absolutely you can do it on the Stabber 2. Capacitors, 2470 gigajoules, pretty decent capacitors, nothing overly special against a mid-Matar ship. Capacitor is not their big thing, but this isn't terrible either. It's not going to be stable for the most part, but you can do some nice things with it. Decent capacitor recharge rates there as well. 7 lock targets. Signature radius of 70 meters is where things get interesting though. That is tiny. 70 meters signature radius is absolutely tiny, and it is going to be so easy for you to just, sit there and signature tank things. You move fast enough, you're small enough, you're actually ridiculously hard to hit, and it takes you a long time it takes them a long time to lock onto you. Scan resolution 324. Not bad, it's a cruiser. I think the Stabber fleet issue does pull ahead thanks to its bonuses, but yeah, it's nothing really to complain about. You'll do pretty well, and if you're really struggling, if you're going to hunt frigates, for example, then a targeting computer rig does actually do really quite well on that, because it's a decent base number. That percentage boost hits it quite largely. The flight velocity, though, is where this ship gets insane. 294 meters per second basic is insanely fast. Again, let's jump out and compare that to the Angel Cartel Cynabal, just for starters. Let's scroll down and do it on this bit here, though. Where are we? Flight velocity, 292. The Stabber 2 is faster than the Cynabal. In fact, the Stabber 2 is faster than most destroyers and frigates in the game. It is an insanely fast-moving vessel, and that is one of its extraordinary advantages. We've also got pretty good inertia and a fairly low mass, which makes it surprisingly nimble too. So what you're getting from this as you look at it is that basically it is a cruiser that is fast-moving and very small. It's fast and hard to hit. The Cynabal is a little bit slower, a little bit larger, but the Cynabal does do a bit more damage, as we'll see now as we go into the trait descriptions. Now here, Advanced Medium Cannon Operation and Advanced Cruiser Command, the same skills as the Cynabal, are going to give you a 10% or 50 at full training medium cannon accuracy fall-off. That is traditionally a autocannon trait there, accuracy fall-off for autocannons, because you're going to be fighting in that accuracy fall-off range, and it really does help. I'm not going to get into full turret mechanics here, but honestly, when you see accuracy fall-off, that does scream that this ship wants to be using autocannons. Yes, it benefits strike cannons as well, but the strike cannon stat tends to be optimal range. You then have a 6% reduction to medium cannon activation time, 30% at full training. Again, you're not increasing the actual damage of the cannons, they just fire faster, so there is more shots in the same time frame, thus more overall damage, more DPS. Advanced Cruiser Command then gets that additional 5% velocity, 25% at full training. That makes for an incredibly fast ship. And you got a roll bonus there of the damage control activation time of 5 seconds. Now let's come out and we're going to add these two side by side now to the Cynabal, just to have a little bit of an overview. I wanted to give the Stabber 2 a bit of a crack at the whip on its own before putting them side by side. So, the first thing you'll notice is the fitting profile is exactly the same between these two, and the roll bonuses, both of them have that 5-second damage control activation time. The Cynabal does get faster warp speed and warp acceleration, which can be useful if an enemy flees, that you can sort of warp after them and you'll land on grid before they do. But on grid, the Stabber 2 is the faster of the two vessels. We then have the advanced medium cannon skill. You'll see that on the Cynabal, you've got that medium cannon activation time again, but it's slightly smaller, 25% down from 30, but you've got 25% medium cannon damage. You're attacking both ends of the DPS equation there, giving for some very large numbers, but you don't have the accuracy fall off. So the Cynabal does rely on being at very specific ranges, where the Stabber 2 can orbit a little bit further outward and still apply its DPS incredibly effectively. Basically, the Stabber 2 is going to have lower overall DPS, but it's going to have better application. You're going to get closer to 100% of that number. Then, if we look at the Advanced Cruise Command, I'm talking crap here because the Cynabal actually has a 7.5% medium cannon accuracy fall-off compared to the 10% there. So the Cynabal does still do that pretty well, and it's got the tracking speed bonuses as well. But basically, yeah, the line I was talking about there, I've got it in my head that the Stabber 2 is better at wider orbits than the Cynabal, and it is. The Cynabal is designed for a closer orbit because it's got that tracking speed bonus, and it's only a 37.5% accuracy fall-off there compared to a 50% accuracy fall-off bonus on the Stabber 2. Yeah, we cover up our mistakes as we go on this channel. Anyway, then the Stabber 2 has that flight velocity. You'll notice flight velocity not on the Cynabal, so you've got a higher base speed plus that 25% additional flight velocity makes for the Stabber 2 being an incredibly speedy little vessel, as we'll see later. Defenses, though, the Cynabal pulls ahead quite dramatically, and the Cynabal as well, very good at armor tanking because it's got no shield bonuses, and the shield and armor tank are the exact same amount of HP. You can go for either of them, depending on the situation. Flight velocity, Stabber 2 is faster. They both have the same warp speed, other than the fact the Cynabal gets that additional 50%, so actually it's warping at 4.5 AU. The power grid output is bigger on the Stabber 2, which has some notable advantages that we'll talk about in the fitting section. The main part of that is that if you want to use strike cannons, the Stabber 2 is going to be much more comfortable with that, and you can actually oversize a couple of modules on the Stabber 2, whereas the Cynabal struggles a bit more with that. If you want to have a medium Nosferatu and a large shield booster on the Stabber 2, for example, you can do that. Neither of the fits I'm going to suggest actually do that, but it is possible. I was doing that with some of the PvE fits, and it does kind of work. Capacitors, the Cynabal pulls ahead on this one quite noticeably on the Stabber 2, but the Stabber 2 doesn't ever feel like it's like ridiculously tight on capacitor. You just have to manage it carefully. Then we come down to cargo hold capacity and source radius, and you'll see that despite being a smaller signature radius, the Stabber 2 is slightly easier to scan down. If someone's using a narrow resonance scanner trying to hunt you, they're more likely to get you in a Stabber 2 than they are in a Cynabal. It's only 5 meters difference, but that can be all the difference. Both of them are pretty easy to scan, though, to be fair. If you're in a dedicated scanning ship with bonuses, yeah, that you're going to be down below that, or if you've got decent enough skills, you're going to get right down to sort of the 230 dead easy. You can actually go very, very far below that nice and easily as training. But the basic premise I'm trying to get at here is that the Cynabal is clearly more of the powerhouse on this, whereas the Stabber 2 has a bit more sort of versatility. The Cynabal is kind of an, I'm not going to say orbit and forget because the PvPers get angry when I use language like that, but it is a much more straightforward PvP vessel, whereas the Stabber 2 is 100% going to require you to be much more effective when it comes to manual piloting. With the insane speeds that it can go at, you are going to need to be able to manage your propulsion modules, and you're going to need to manage your engine output as well manually, changing from 100% engine output down to different speeds in order to make sure that you are orbiting at a correct rate, or you're moving towards, approaching, or moving away at correct speeds. You're going to be needing to manually pilot a lot with the Stabber 2 to get the most out of it, which kind of gives it a higher skill ceiling, which I like. But that said and done, let's jump into the fitting and have a look at the suggestions that were given to me. This first fit was suggested by Axel. Now remember, I'm not really a PvPer, so when I do a ship fitting guide that talks about a PvP fitting, I'm relying on fits that have been suggested and demonstrated by other players. And when Axel first suggested this fit, I was like, okay, but cool, what can it do? And then he showed me kill mails of a fully kitted out PvP Harbinger and a Vigilant. And anything that can take out a Vigilant and a Harbinger is pretty powerful in my books, especially considering the Stabber 2 is fairly dismissed by most players. And it works essentially by getting right up into someone's grill and using its signature radius and speed to its advantage to survive as long as possible, whilst essentially doing death by 1,000 cuts. 863.14 DPS isn't huge. Remember, I am using an unleveled nano core here. I'm using the comet core with just the basic 18% damage on it. I haven't leveled this up whatsoever, and we're using Gisty C-type medium autocannons. Now, the wonderful thing about the Stabber 2 here is that optimal range looks very short, but the accuracy fall-off of nearly 20 kilometers means that you can be sitting 15 to 17 kilometers out and still doing about 80 to 85% of your DPS, which the Cynabal cannot do. At similar ranges, the Cynabal's almost at 50% of its DPS, where the Stabber 2 has that massive advantage over it. Of course, the Cynabal, 60% of its overall DPS is probably about the same as 80% of the Stabber 2's DPS, considering the Cynabal has more damage, but you kind of get my point here. Once you're in that close range, you've got your afterburner running. That is going to allow you to be going supremely fast in very small orbits, very small target, very fast moving ship. You're already going to be hard to hit, but then we have a Navy tracking disruptor on there as well, just to reduce their ability to hit you even further. Now, do be aware that obviously it's a tracking disruptor. This means you want to be hunting ships that are using turrets, like the aforementioned Harbinger and Vigilant, and so this is going to do really well with that. You are going to have to manage your own flight speed. I would use the afterburner, but then reduce the speed a little bit to make sure you're actually applying damage to the target, because remember, the Stabber 2 does not have bonuses to turret tracking. But if you're webbed, for example, you can then just push your afterburner all the way back up to 100%, and you're going to be moving at those same incredibly hard to hit speeds, despite being under the effect of a stasis webifier. That is the power of the Stabber 2, that essentially you want to be moving at a certain speed, and if something tries to slow you down beyond that speed, you can actually push up beyond it. That's the advantage of something that is moving this quickly. Now, in order to hold the target in place, we've got a Warp Scrambler and a Stasis Webifier. 4 points of Scram should be enough to go up against someone who is not in a dedicated anti-PvP fit. We're looking at you, Claralam runners, but for the most part, you should be okay to pin something down with that, hold it nice and slow with that Republic Fleet Stasis Webifier, and then just manage your throttle to maintain the right speeds. Now, just in case you do start to take a bit of damage, Axel's gone for a more active approach here than I perhaps would have done for PvP, but hey, he says it works and the evidence suggests that it does. We're looking here at a large shield booster supported by 2 adaptive invulnerability fields and a medium capacitor battery. Now, the theory here, I suppose, is that you take a decent amount of damage, then you pop the capacitor battery to get that additional boost of capacitor, run the large shield booster to whip your shields right back up to 100%, and then just hope you don't take too much damage before the battery comes off cooldown. I suppose even if it does, you've still got your capacitor, your main capacitor underneath, that you can run that large shield booster for a few cycles here and there as you need to. Obviously, we can't keep it fully running because we've only got a 43-second capacitor on this thing, even with that battery. That does make me slightly nervous, but again, I'm not a PvPer. To me, looking at something with 43-second capacitor, I don't mind if a ship isn't completely capacitor balanced. But 43 seconds does make me nervous, but I'm assured that that is absolutely fine. Again, I defer to the experts on this situation, and the kill count that he has proves that this ship is viable. If we look at the rigs, you'll see that basically on the left-hand side here, he's gone for a core defense charge economizer and 2 burst aerators. Now, the defense economizer is what's helping us to get the most out of that shield boost. 30% additional boost on a large shield booster. Yeah, you could go for capacitor safeguards, but I would rather not. I would rather just manage. I've said this before. I would rather manage the capacitor better and get bigger boosts out of it than have a slightly less capacitor aggressive shield booster that does the same thing. It's all about management, and I think the charge economizer personally does pull out ahead of that. It's how I tend to do it for PvE, and certainly the theory stands with what I understand from that as well. Now for rigs, I've gone for 3 auxiliary thrusters because they're fairly expensive and I didn't want to change the rigs based on Axel's recommendation, but the fit he did show me swaps out one of those for a targeting system relay, which of course gives you that little bit of extra targeting speed, and that 415mm scan resolution does shoot right the hell up because it's a fairly, you know, it's like a, I can't remember the exact boost off the top of my head, but you get a decent boost out of that targeting rig, that is going to help you lock onto faster targets, smaller targets that little bit faster. Now, for me, again, I'm not a PvPer, but I love the theory of this one, and the proof is in the pudding, and the kill mails I've seen with this are impressive. And if you do give this a try and you manage to get a couple of kills yourself, please send them to me on Discord. I would love to see how that works. This second fit was suggested by Vetermune himself, the king of the Stabber fleet issue in regards to PvP, and oh my goodness, I love the concept of this one. He sold this to me as basically the Stabber 2 being the best tackle cruiser in the game, and certainly with the speeds that this ship gets as standard, yeah, I can see why. If we just look at the navigation here, 720.3 meters per second, whilst we're docked without the micro warp drive on. You can imagine how fast this thing can go when that is all active. And it is primarily a tackle cruiser. You're aiming to get close enough to a battleship or other cruisers or battle cruisers and things like that and hold them in place while avoiding incoming damage. And with the additional power grid that this has over the Cynabal, you can actually do some really quite cool stuff with it. Now, for the high slots, we've gone for Gisty C-type autocannons. You're not really here to do much damage, but hey, the more damage you can do, the better you're going to be helping your fleet out. If you're going on like a cruiser roam, this is a very powerful ship to have with you because of the speed with which you can tackle. Then you're sitting there orbiting around or approaching and manually moving away, depending on how you're doing things and what your target is, with 863.14 DPS. That's not bad at all, especially considering that we've got that accuracy fall-off bonus, which means we're actually pretty effective at 20-kilometer range on this. Really quite effective, in fact. At that range, of course, we have a long point Caldari Navy warp disruptors here, 27.5 kilometers. We can be orbiting at that range and still holding a target and dealing decent damage with those autocannons. This is perfect for if you want to tackle a battleship, for example, because you're moving at very fast speeds with a very small signature radius, even with a micro warp drive active, and just absolutely holding it in place. Then we have a large shield extender here on the far left-hand side. I've gone for a protector large shield extender and a damage control unit. Both of those, plus the Stabber 2's bonus to the damage control activation time, means that when you start holding a target, if it does manage to start getting some shots off on you, you can just pop an extender and or a DCU and just stay in position and hold it there quite happily. You can be orbiting outside of web range, so they're just not going to be able to slow you down, and even with the micro warp drive signature radius boost, the speeds that you're doing are absolutely incredible. You can get into range, tackle, then turn that off and just orbit at a really effective speed, or you can just orbit with the micro warp drive, or approach and move, manual piloting all the way on this one. If you do need to get a bit closer, then a Republic Fleet Warp Scrambler goes with that Navy Disruptor to give you 6 points of tackle right up in their grill, turning off their micro warp drive and holding them in position while the rest of the fleet arrives, and a web as well just to slow down if you need to. For the rigs, Vetermune suggested a collision accelerator and 2 burst aerators, followed by 3 auxiliary thrusters. That is how we get the absolutely insane speeds out of this. He does mention in his message to me that if you have a nano core that can add additional speed, then you could swap one of those for a polycarbon engine housing just to help this move like an absolute rocket. Excellent for tackling, excellent for getting up in someone's face and just doing some severe damage to them. This is how I'm actually running things now. I want to try some PvP roams with cruisers. I would love to join Vetermune on a roam, and who knows, maybe I'll record it and see how that all goes for you guys. And that is the Stabber 2. This was a ship that I really struggled with when I first acquired one. I fitted it, I tried it for PvE like I mainly do. I'm not much of a PvPer, so I want to see how well a ship can do in PvE. And for a cruiser, yeah, I kind of struggled with this one because I always found it went too fast for its own guns, and whilst yes, you can argue that yes, you can slow down your speeds using the throttle function on a ship, it does beg a question as a PvEer, what's the point in getting those bonuses? For PvP, on the other hand, yes, I absolutely understand it, and looking at things, the Stabber 2 is clearly a PvP ship. If you're looking for something that can do PvP and PvE, the Cynabal is going to pull ahead of it on that. Whereas for PvP alone, there are definitely situations where I'd rather be running a Stabber 2 than a Cynabal. And hopefully this has given you some inspiration to try that out. Again, if you are running the Stabber 2 at all, if this is a ship that you fly, both in PvE or PvP, I would love to know how you get on with it. If you've got a different fit to the ones showcased in this video, leave a comment down below. I will try to reply to every comment that I get. I do try to reply to every comment I get for the most part. Let me know what you think of this ship, if it's one you're using, if you like it, if you don't like it, what you think could be changed. We do have a balance patch coming up later this month, so who knows, maybe the Tech 10 2-tier frigates, 2-tier cruisers like the Stabber 2, the Vexor 2, the Caracal 2, and the Omen 2 might be getting some buffs, because I'd love to see these ships used more, especially when it looks this stunningly cool. Come on. Look at this nanocore. I mean, what's not to love about this? A jet black ship with ice blue markings and these comet trails coming off the side of it. Who doesn't want to fly that more in the game? Anyway, folks, thank you very much for watching this one right the way through to the end. Happy sailing, and see you in New Eden!